The map of Lena's life was expertly drafted, its borders inked in the steady, reliable hand of her husband, Peter. Each contour was familiar, each feature predictable. The comfortable, book-lined apartment in the leafy neighborhood, their shared teaching positions at the university, his in geology, hers in linguistics, the Thursday night dinners with colleagues, the annual summer hiking trip to the same national park. It was a good map. It led to a known, safe destination. Lena, a translator of technical and historical texts, understood the value of a clear legend, of knowing exactly what each symbol meant. Peter was her North Star, her fixed point. He was a good man, solid as the bedrock he studied, his love as dependable as the tectonic plates he said moved too slowly for anyone to notice. So why, on this rain-smeared Tuesday evening, did the sight of his hiking boots, neatly aligned by the door, their soles worn in a pattern she knew by heart, fill her with a vertigo so profound she had to grip the kitchen counter? The fissure in her well-charted world appeared not with an earthquake, but with the soft rustle of an interdepartmental memo. The university press was undertaking a monumental project, the translation and publication of the complete field journals of the late Alexander, Lena Thorne, a legendary reclusive geographer and cartographer who had spent half a century mapping the most remote, unmappable places on Earth-shifting sand seas, melting glacial frontiers, the haunted borderlands where three countries met in a tangle of forgotten fences and wild stories. The journals were a chaotic masterpiece, a blend of rigorous scientific observation, mythological speculation, and deeply personal, often poetic ruminations. They required a translator who was not just a linguist, but a literary archaeologist, someone with the sensibility to navigate the canyons between objective fact and subjective truth. The project head, an old professor of Lena's, made the call. It's a 3-month residency, Lena, at his old family estate in the Scottish Highlands. The place is a museum of his mind. The journals are there. They've never been copied. You'll need to live with them. Peter saw the professional prestige. 3 months is a long time, but it's a career-defining project. Lex Thorne is a giant. It'll be cold and isolated, but you've always loved quiet. He kissed her forehead. Just make sure the estate has decent heating. I'll manage here. His trust was a wide, stable continent. She had never given him reason to doubt its borders. The journey to Glenmore House felt like traveling off the edge of her own map. The train north gave way to a local bus, which surrendered to a taxi that climbed a single-track road into a landscape of bruised purple hills and sudden, gleaming locks. The air grew thin and sharp, smelling of peat smoke and cold stone. The house, when it appeared, was not a cozy lodge, but a stark, gray stone tower house clinging to a bare hillside, its windows eyes against the vast, brooding sky. The keeper of the estate, a man named Mr. Dalziel, was ancient and taciturn. He led her to a cavernous, wood-paneled study, its walls a collage of enormous, hand-drawn maps, its air thick with the scent of old paper, pipe tobacco, and loneliness. In the center of a massive oak table sat the journals, dozens of them. Leather-bound, fat with inserted sketches, dried flowers, and scraps of foreign newsprint. He left instructions, Dalziel grumbled. The journals didn't leave this room. The light is best in the morning. He was particular about the light. With that, he departed, leaving Lena alone with the ghost. The first journal she opened was not a record. It was a psyche spilled onto paper. Thorne's handwriting was an aggressive, beautiful scrawl, switching between English, Gaelic, Latin, and snatches of indigenous languages from a dozen continents. He didn't just describe a mountain, he described its ancient, grudging personality. He didn't chart a river's course, he chronicled its mood changes with the seasons. A border was not a line, but a scar on the skin of the earth, sometimes healed, often still weeping. He wrote of getting lost for days in a fog so thick it felt like being unborn, and of the sound a particular kind of wind made through polar ice, which he called the bones of the earth singing. Her initial task, to create a coherent, scholarly translation, felt instantly absurd. How did one translate a sensation, a personality ascribed to a landform? She spent her first days floundering, her neat linguistic tools useless against the torrent of his synesthetic vision. On the third day, as she struggled with a passage where Thorne described a desert not as hot, but as acoustically barren, the silence there has a thirst, a voice spoke from the doorway. "You're trying to press a glacier into a teacup," she started. A man leaned against the doorframe, silhouetted by the weak hall light. He was younger than she expected, perhaps in his late 40s, with the lean, weathered look of someone who lived outdoors. His hair was a thick, unruly mix of brown and gray, and his eyes were the color of the slate cliffs behind the house. He wore muddy walking trousers and a heavy sweater with holes at the elbows. This was not Mr. Dalziel. "I'm translating," she said, defensive. "No, you're transcribing," he corrected, stepping into the room. He moved with a quiet, predatory grace. "You're moving words from one language to another." Lex didn't deal in words. He dealt in textures, in vibrations. "That passage you're butchering," he was trying to describe the way sound dies in ultra-dry air. "It doesn't echo. It just vanishes. A kind of auditory mortality. You need to find the English that makes someone feel that loss, not just understand the meteorology." "And you are?" Lena asked, her professional pride stung. "Caleb Thorne, Lex's nephew, the black sheep who preferred the family's neglected sheep farm to his uncle's glorious expeditions. I look after the land, and the ghost." His smile was brief, without warmth. "He mentioned you'd be coming, the academic. He said, 'She'll either get it immediately, or she'll flatten it all into footnotes.' Which are you?" From that tense beginning, a fraught, magnetic collaboration formed. Caleb, it turned out, was the true inheritor of his uncle's sensibility, if not his fame. He hadn't traveled the world, but he knew every inch of the Glenmore estate with the same deep, poetic intimacy. He became an unofficial consultant, appearing at odd hours to clarify a sketched landmark, to explain the local folklore Lex had woven into his global observations, to mimic the bird call Lex had described as the sound of a splintering rainbow. Slowly, under Caleb's intense, challenging gaze, Lena's method changed. She stopped fighting the poetry and started navigating it. She spent hours staring at a single, intricate map of an imaginary island Lex had drawn as a boy, feeling its longing for adventure. She asked Caleb not for definitions, but for experiences. "What does granite feel like at dawn after a frost? Is there a smell to loneliness here, like he writes about in the tundra?" Caleb answered not with words, but with actions. He woke her before sunrise and took her to a high ridge to feel the granite sleep, leave it as the sun touched it. He showed her a hidden peat bog where the stillness was so complete it felt like a held breath. He spoke of the land with a possessive, tender familiarity that was the opposite of Peter's analytical, classifying love for rocks. Peter saw geology as a system to be understood. Caleb, like Lex, saw it as a story to be heard. In the isolation of the tower, with only this intense, feral man and the mesmerizing ghost of his uncle for company, the careful map of Lena's own life began to blur. One evening, as a gale screamed around the stone walls, she found herself speaking not of subclauses, but of the quiet, cartographed existence she led. She spoke of the unspoken expectations, the way her life with Peter felt like a beautifully rendered but static map accurate, but showing no possibility of terra incognita. Caleb listened, whittling a piece of driftwood by the fire. "You've spent your life translating other people's territories," he said, not looking up. "When do you get to chart your own? Even if it's just a blank page with 'Here be dragons' scrawled in the corner?" The question was a seismic event. It suggested she had a territory. It suggested she could be the cartographer, not just the translator. The first touch was a lesson in orientation. He was trying to explain Lex's concept of true north versus magnetic north as a metaphor for desire versus duty. Magnetic north pulls the compass needle. It's seductive, but it moves. It's unreliable. True north is fixed. It's the axis of the world. Most people spend their lives following the magnetic pull, wondering why they're going in circles. Which is which? She asked, the firelight painting his sharp features in golden shadow. In answer, he took her hand. His palm was rough, lined with scars from wire and stone. He led her out of the study through a side door and into the biting night. He pointed to a bright, steady star low in the northern sky. Polaris, true north. Then he opened her hand and placed a simple old hiking compass in her palm. The needle wavered, then settled, pointing slightly east of the star. Magnetic north. See the declination? The difference between where you're told to go and where you actually are. He closed her fingers over the compass, his hand enveloping hers. The cold metal warmed between their palms. The trick is knowing which one you're navigating by. He didn't let go. They stood in the freezing dark, hands clasped around the trembling needle, their breath pluming together in the silver air. The intimacy was not in the touch, but in the shared understanding of being lost, of seeking a bearing. She didn't pull away. After that, the work became a joint expedition into unmapped emotional terrain. The lies to Peter in their brief, crackling satellite phone calls were simple. The material was more voluminous than expected. The need for deep concentration, absolute. Peter's replies were full of practical concern about her diet and the weather. His trust was the stable, fixed true north on her old map, from which she was now deviating with every stolen glance, every shared silence with Caleb. With Caleb, Lena felt the contours of a new self emerge, raw and breathtaking. He showed her how to find water by the lie of the land, how to read approaching weather in the behavior of the birds, how to be still enough to hear the land's own quiet stories. They argued about history and myth under skies so thick with stars they felt oppressive. He was all instinct, intuition, a deep connection to the physical world that was both brutal and reverent. He lived simply, his wealth and knowledge of his patch of earth. He was the unexplored, treacherous, glorious wilderness to Peter's safe, well-documented trail. The physical culmination felt like reaching the summit of a forbidden peak. It happened in Caleb's Spartan room in the old farmstead, the air cold and smelling of wood s'more and lanolin from the sheep. His kiss was not a question. It was a claiming of discovered land. It tasted of whiskey and wild thyme, and a truth so stark it felt like freezing. For the first time, Lena was not translating an experience. She was the experience, the uncharted territory. The 3-month residency dissolved into a single, breathless season. Back in the city for a dreaded weekend visit, she was a stranger in her own apartment. She listened to Peter explain a groundbreaking new method for dating sedimentary layers, her mind filled with the memory of Caleb's hands, calloused from stone and soil, tracing the lines on her back as if reading a personal topography. She smiled and felt like the worst kind of forgery. The crisis was born from Peter's own meticulous nature, his scientist's eye for anomaly. He tracked a package of specialized dictionaries she'd requested. The tracking showed it had been delivered to a remote post office in a village miles from Glenmore House. When he asked, she fumbled an explanation about the estate's unreliable mail service. Later, reviewing their shared cloud storage out of idle habit, he saw a folder of her translation drafts. Among them was a scanned sketch, clearly not from Lex's journals. It was a deft, sensitive pencil drawing of Lena herself, asleep in a winged armchair by a fire, a wool blanket tangled around her. It was unsigned, but it was not the work of an octogenarian ghost. The style was alive, immediate, intimate. He didn't confront her until she returned, the project nominally complete. He was waiting in their tidy living room, the printed sketch on the coffee table between them, like evidence of a crime scene. The post office in Kilshannon doesn't do parcel holding for estates, he began, his voice frighteningly calm. And this, he tapped the sketch. This is not a historical document. Who is he, Lena? The man who draws you while you sleep. All the air vanished. The carefully constructed alternate world collapsed under the weight of one piece of paper. She could have denied, could have said it was a copy of an old sketch, but under the terrible, wounded clarity of his gaze, the months of dual existence crystallized into a single shattering truth. His name is Caleb, she whispered, the name a sacred, profane sound in that sterile room. Lex's nephew. I've fallen in love with him. Peter did not erupt. He seemed to implode, his solid frame collapsing inward. He looked at her with the horror of a geologist who has just discovered the fossil of a completely unknown, impossible species in a familiar stratum. For how long? Most of the time there. He nodded, a short mechanical jerk. And this is the true landscape? The unmapped version of you? The one that requires a shepherd to interpret it? The cruelty of the metaphor, his reduction of Caleb's profound connection to the land to a mere pastoral cliché, was devastating. It stripped her awakening of all its poetry, leaving only the raw, ugly facts of betrayal. Peter, I'm sorry, but you are, he interrupted, his voice finally cracking, raw as a fresh wound. You're sorry, but you still went. You still mapped it. You took a shared life, a territory we surveyed together, and you redrew the borders. You made me a foreigner in my own marriage. He stood, turning his back to her, shoulders rigid. I need you to leave. Now. I can't look at this map anymore. It's a lie. She packed in a numb haze. She did not go to the Highlands. She knew with a certainty that felt like dying that Caleb's world of elemental truths could not absorb the complex, civilized wreckage she had made. He was a man of fixed points and clear skies, not of legal separation and shattered trust. She went to an anonymous hotel, the distant city roar a mockery of the Highland silence. She sent a text with only 2 words. It's over. His reply came a day later, with the sunrise over a sea he could see from his hill. The land will remember your footsteps. For a week, she was a ghost. Then, driven by a need for something real, she used the last of the project fee to rent a tiny cottage, not in the Highlands, but on the stark, beautiful coast of Norfolk, a flat land of huge skies and shifting sands. It was a different kind of wilderness. She brought no maps. She heard through the thin thread of a mutual colleague that Peter had taken a sabbatical to do fieldwork in Patagonia. She hoped with a pain that had become a permanent feature of her internal geography that he found solid ground. One morning a flat, heavy parcel arrived. No note. Inside, protected between sheets of plywood, was not a book, but a map. A beautiful, hand-drawn, intricately inked map of the Glenmore estate and its surrounding hills. It was meticulously accurate. Every crag, every burn, every stand of twisted pine was rendered with breathtaking skill. But in the center, where the tower house of Glenmore stood, the cartographer had done something extraordinary. He had not drawn the house. Instead, he had drawn a compass rose, but not a normal one. The points were not labeled N, S, E, W. They were labeled with words silence, longing, stone, sky. And where the house should have been, at the very center of the rose, was a small, perfect, empty circle, a blank space, a terra incognita. She pinned the map to the whitewashed wall of her cottage. She would study it for hours. She had chosen, in the end, to leave the mapped life, the safe journey. She had chosen the blank space, the uncharted territory of her own solitude. It was terrifying. It was vast. It was empty of promises. But for the first time, the map she was looking at was her own to draw. She picked up a simple pencil, and on a fresh, clean sheet of paper, she began, not with words, but with a single, hesitant, exploratory line.